Hi everyone, I am coming to you again from home, and I am here with some thoughts and commentary on week 6 of our Lent study. Once again, we are working with the book Tell Someone by Greg Laurie, and tonight we come to chapter 10 and the epilogue. We are closing in on wrapping up our discussion of this book, but I hope just at the beginning of our conversation about evangelism as a congregation. So I'll be going back and forth between my book and my notes that I have in front of me here. Chapter 10 begins on page 101 and is titled Closing the Deal. There are some, as with every other part of this book, there are some things where I believe Greg Laurie makes some excellent points and puts it very well, and there are some other things that I don't necessarily think fit well into our context, but I would take those things and say, how can we make that sort of thing our own? And we'll get to a couple of those things very shortly here. So Greg Laurie, on page 102, is talking about an encounter he has with a friend also named Greg. And in the middle of the page he says, "Greg, I know this looks strange, but I have to tell you that Christ has so changed my life, I just have to go out and tell people." And I read that and I thought, what a great conversation starter. It's a bold statement. It is kind of a nature where people kind of have to react to it somehow. And yet it is not badgering or intimidating. It is talking about a profound difference your faith has made in your life. I think that can be an entry point for telling your story, as we've talked about a little bit over the past couple of sessions, how important that is. But I think it's the sort of statement where you can say that, and it just opens the door to conversation. People can respond however they want. They can say, "That's great, tell me more." They can say, "I'm happy for you, that's nice, I don't want to talk about it right now." But you've made your point, and you've made it in a way that at least leaves the door open for conversation and is not in any way going to shut down conversation. So I really like that. And if you feel like your faith has made a difference in your life, I think that would be a great conversation starter to have with people about your faith. Now again, when we go ahead and we want to share our faith with people, one of the places where I depart a little bit from Greg Laurie's thoughts on it is my sense is that it is always more effective when shared in the context of a relationship. There's an acronym called BLESS, and the evangelism team has been talking about this for a little bit. And it's kind of a process you can walk through with a person you are trying to share your faith with. And it is, I sure hope I can remember this now. Bless. Begin with prayer. Pray with the person, pray about the person, pray for the person. Listen to the person. Really listen. Turn your phone off, turn your TV off, whatever it is that might distract you. Give that person your full attention. That is truly a gift that you can give to somebody. So L, listen to the person. The next one I think is the easiest. E, eat with someone. There is something about sharing fellowship around the table that really makes a tremendous difference in your ability to build a relationship. Serve the person. So the first S in bless is serve. By the time you have begun with prayer, listened to the person, and eaten with the person, you probably have a good idea of a way you can serve this person in Christian love. Serve the person, and the final step, share the story. Share the story of what God has done through Christ, and share the story of what God has done in your life. By the time you get to that last part, you're operating, hopefully by then, in a context of a trusting relationship. So by that point, when you go to share something and you say, "This is something that's really meaningful to me, and I think it can be meaningful to you," the person has a very good sense that you are sharing it with them because you care, not necessarily because you are trying to put butts in the pews or whatever the case may be. So I think if you have built a relationship and cultivated a sense of trust and honesty with people, when you make a statement like that, people will probably be more open to it. But I really do love what he says there. Christ has changed my life, and I just can't help but tell people. Like I said, what a great conversation starter. He talks a little bit about people encountering some resistance in the form of questions that you don't know how to answer. I think the best way to approach that is do your best to answer the question, and then turn back to Christ. Turn back to what God has done in your life. Other people disagree with me on this, but I will go out and say it. It is perfectly okay to say to somebody in a conversation like this, you know what? I don't know. Or even better, you know what? I don't know, but I can find out. Or maybe even better than that, why don't we try to find out together? I know someone we can talk to. And I think being honest and saying, I don't know everything, also helps open up conversation. It avoids one of the pitfalls of evangelism where sometimes if you are trying to share your faith, it can come off as, I have this great thing and I know more than you. Don't you want to be as great as me? When you have the confidence to say, you know what, I don't know, but I can find out, sometimes that can also help move the conversation forward. It helps keep you on a level playing field with folks. So I want to go a little further down here into the text. I think it's also a good point that Laurie makes on page 104. He's talking about in the middle paragraph. But there is that same tension when we are thinking of asking the non-believer we are speaking to if they would like to ask Jesus into their life. Frankly, I think we overcomplicate this. I think sometimes if there is an opportunity that we can talk to people and see, are we ready to take things to the next level, I don't know that we necessarily have to say something elaborate, but I go back and forth about this, and people have varying church backgrounds and heritages, and I'm speaking from my own theological heritage as a Lutheran. One of the reasons why it troubles me to tell folks, hey, you know what? Let's decide right now to commit your life to Jesus, or are you going to choose Jesus? Certainly, the question, are you going to choose Jesus, is a difficult one to answer. If it was as simple as us choosing Jesus, he wouldn't have had to die. So, human nature is we may try to choose Jesus, we're probably going to end up choosing ourselves instead. I'm a little more open to, are you ready to commit your life to Jesus? Being able to say, yes, I'm willing to start a commitment. But I sense that among people who have been part of the Lutheran Church or the Catholic Church, the Methodists, many of the mainline denominations, we might have some other questions that we might want to ask people if we share something about our faith and people are receptive to it. Think for just a minute about what is a different question that you could ask to somebody to try and take things to the next level. Let me give you just a moment to think about that. What is another question other than, are you ready to commit your life to Jesus, that you might ask somebody if it seems like they're ready to take that conversation to the next level? I think maybe one of the simplest, most straightforward questions would be, can I pick you up and bring you to church this Sunday? Trying to get people connected to a community sooner rather than later. And just visiting the church one time does not necessarily connect them to the community, but it does give them a sense of this is a bit of why my faith matters to me, because it gathers this kind of community. So rather than saying, hey, why don't you meet me at church, or rather than saying, you should come to my church. A step up from that is, why don't we meet at church? That way they know there will at least be someone that they recognize who's familiar. Or even a step better than that, like I said a moment ago, can I pick you up on Sunday and bring you to church? Because I think that really gets that sense of hospitality out there. So that is definitely something that we want to keep in mind. And maybe another question you can ask is, can we meet again and maybe meet with somebody who has helped me on my journey of faith? That does not necessarily have to be the pastor. It could be a fellow church member, it could be a family member, but somebody who's kind of been a mentor to you, somebody who has helped you in your journey of faith. Tell the person, if they are receptive to the conversation, why don't we meet with this person? This person has really helped shape my faith, and I think you'd get a lot out of talking to them. Certainly sharing your faith can be just as simple as an invitation like that, or taking that to the next level can be as simple as offering an invitation like that. There is always, of course, the possibility that a person can say no. I've shared this with some of you before. I went to a presentation and the person was talking about the way people hold churches to very peculiar standards. They said if you go to a restaurant and you have a bad experience at the restaurant, you probably don't stop eating out altogether. You stop going to that particular place. But with churches, a lot of times people have a bad experience at church and they stop going altogether. In a similar vein, sometimes if we invite someone to church and the person says no, it might be 20 years before we invite someone else to church. If we say so to somebody, hey, do you want to meet up for lunch? And they say no, we're probably going to ask them to meet us for lunch again at some point soon. But if you have approached and engaged a person respectfully in the context of a relationship where you've built trust, and the person says no, you're not out anything, and you probably, if you've gone through that time and effort of building a relationship, even if the person says no, they probably will not take offense to the invitation, and you should not take offense to the person saying no. It might not be the right time, it might not be the right place, you might not be the right person. But sometimes you will hear no. I've never been in sales, but people I know who have said, you get used to it. That doesn't mean we like hearing it, but it's just to understand that if we do hear no, that's okay. In that vein, to pick up with the text again on page 108, Lori writes about a guy who is reeling in some kind of giant fish somewhere in Ohio. I'm not big into fishing, so I'm not big on these details. But he says, when asked about the fish, the man said, I was at the right place at the right time, and I was fool enough to grab it. That's the same attitude we should have in fishing for men. Being at the right place at the right time and being fool enough to take a risk and share the gospel. So Lori recognizes that there's a little bit of risk in here involved. There's a little bit of putting yourself on the line a little bit. But he's also very clear that we are to be faithful in sharing the message, and we leave the results in God's hands. As Paul wrote in his epistles, one person plants, another person waters, another reaps the harvest. We may plant a seed that we may not know is growing. Greg Laurie also talks about praying with a person who is receptive or open to the conversation where you share the gospel. So I'd definitely like you to think a little bit about how might you pray with someone who is wanting to begin or deepen a relationship with Jesus. So let me just let you ponder that for a moment. How would you pray for somebody who wants to begin or deepen a relationship with Jesus? Greg also talks, starting on page 110, about his friend Mark, somebody who had kind of helped him grow into his faith. And I want to ask if you have had someone like Mark in your life, someone who has really helped you grow into your faith and your understanding of it. What about that person would you want to emulate? What about that person would be good for you to strive for in your life? I think of one mentor I had, and the word that comes to mind that I really admire about this person is this person was very genuine. What you see was what you got. There was no pretense, no putting on airs. You just knew when you talked to this person, particularly when you talked to this person about her faith. It was just all right there, an open book. And I really admire that sincerity and genuineness. So I think about that, and that is a quality I do try to cultivate in myself as well. Moving on to the epilogue, a couple of concluding thoughts that Greg Laurie offers us. If you'll turn with me in your text to page 119, I think he really hits the nail on the head. He talks about practicing evangelism as being more of a journey than a destination. He says, I have found that God tends to lead us one step at a time. If we take the first step of obedience, he will then show us what the next step is. So again, we remember back to the beginning of our study, one of the reasons why we practice evangelism is very simple. Jesus says so, and says so multiple times. So sharing our faith, it's a commandment. So if we can show obedience to that commandment, Laurie says that then God kind of opens up next steps to us. And I really like that concept, that God invites us to do this, God tells us we should do it, and when we respond in faith, God will then show us the next step and the next step. We may not see it right away, but as we grow in our obedience to God, we will see a little bit farther down the path each time. So I really like that idea that he has in there. But it is not just God says so, so we do it. And I think Greg Laurie on page 122 is also right on the money when he says, you will find the joy and happiness of serving others and helping them come to and grow in their faith in Christ. Hopefully you have discovered that sharing your faith is not an option for us as followers of Christ. The Lord has commanded us to go into all the world and preach the gospel. So it's not just that it's a commandment, but when we begin to obey that commandment and grow into faith with it, we find joy in that we are able to make a difference in people's lives. And I really like that idea of sharing our faith out of joy rather than out of it being commandment. And as I touched on before, we are out there to sow seeds. We are out there to cast the net. Not every seed is going to sprout. Not every time we haul in the net are we going to have a prize catch. But Laurie reminds us and encourages us on page 124, your job is to be faithful. Your job is to do your part and leave the results in the hands of God. And I think that is absolutely true, and something that we need to remember. We can grow into how well we do our part. We can do our part more often, more effectively. Ultimately, the Holy Spirit is the one who is going to help people grow in their faith. But God will work through us to get that ball rolling. So I think that's pretty exciting. And the one thought I want to conclude with from Greg Laurie here is, you cannot lead everyone to Christ, but by God's grace, you can lead someone to Him. And I think that notion of we probably will not bring the entire world to faith in Jesus, but we may change one person's entire world by doing just that. And just a couple of concluding thoughts. First of all, I want to thank all of you who have stuck with this through 6 weeks and 10 chapters. I knew from the outset that this book was going to be a challenge. This was going to be a stretch for us. Evangelism is usually not the favorite topic among Lutherans, and some of the approaches and some of the theology that Greg Laurie uses are probably very different than what we are accustomed to, and probably challenging for us. So I want to thank you for being a part of this, and want to encourage you to continue this conversation. Continue it with people in your group. Continue it with me. Continue it with your church council. Continue this conversation about evangelism in your family or with members of our evangelism team at church. This is an area that all of us, and I absolutely include myself in that, all of us can grow in, and I think it's one of those things where when you start off in something, you grow the fastest. And I think that can be exciting. I think it would be a blessing to our congregation, it would be a blessing to our community, and a blessing to the world if we can grow in our ability to share our faith. So I thank you for your time and energy being a part of this, and hope that this book has at least planted some seeds that will begin to sprout and grow in the days, weeks, and months to come. So thank you so much for being a part of this, and let's put our heads together and figure out how we can go and tell someone. Thanks be to God.